Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel where we do painting tutorials. Like always, I start by taping down my paper with masking tape and I pick up some of the drawing, especially from the sky with a neat eraser, just enough so I don't have black lines left over, but I can still see some subtle hints of the graphite to know where to place what. I start by coloring the top of the sky with my Phthalo blue, and I'm just going to color the sky and leave the clouds blank for now. For the bottom, I use some ultramarine, well actually bright ultramarine. That way I get a gradient so it's more saturated on the top, and I also use that ultramarine on the bottom of all of the clouds, just a very light soft layer. We don't want this to be too strong because it's clouds. Then I take my watercolor brush and I start blending from the bottom upwards, so I'm going from light to dark, and first I only do the sky and leave the clouds out of this. I go left to right, make sure it's smooth or pretty much smooth. I'm not going for 100% perfection, but I do want this to be the sky, so yeah, a bit smooth. Then once I finish that, because it's actually a very tiny piece, I go with a lot of water over that shadow I add with the ultramarine on the clouds, and I dilute upwards with just some water. While that dries, I take some yellow ochre and I sketch the top of the left mountain with it. I'm adding these zigzag horizontal patterns to mimic some rockiness, maybe some erosion on the mountains, and then I color the mountain on the left side entirely with some earthy green, and I add a bit of dark blue, aka a helio blue, and some cadmium orange on top of it. I'm sorry my camera didn't focus on that one, so I fast forwarded. If you know any tips or settings I can use, please let me know in the comments down below. I don't know why I did that. Anyway, I take my brush again, and with barely any water on this, I just tap over the entire mountain. I do start from light to dark, so from the yellow ochre towards the green and the blue. That way I get a lot of texture, which is helpful to mimic the look of rocks. While that dries, again I take the same colors and I do the mountain on the right side. I work in this order, that way I do not have to wait in between for layers to dry and so on. I can always work on whatever is the next subject. So I color the top of that mountain with some helium blue reddish, which is my darkest blue, and I apply random bits of cat orange on top of it, that way they neutralize each other and looks like a nice dark gray, but with subtle hints of brown and some green, which I'm going to add. It just makes it look much more natural in my opinion. And then for the bottom of the right mountain, I do a base layer of my earthy green, then I go over it with some blue, so to make a dark green, and I go with tiny amount of orange on top of that, again to neutralize the blue and make it a nice dark green instead of a turquoise. Then again, take my brush with barely any water. I only dip the tip of the brush and then I dry it on the napkin, and then I tap on top of the mountain. Mind you, this is a good quality brush, so it does tend to hold a good amount of water, even though it is synthetic. The amount of water your brush holds depends tremendously on the brand, on the quality, on what kind of fibers are in it, so keep that in mind. I just like to use very little water, so you may want to try it out on your forearm or your hand. Just very lightly touch the brush on top of your hand and see if it leaves a little droplet. If there is a droplet, that is too wet and you may want to untap it a couple of times onto a napkin to dry it up further. For the bottom of my left mountain, I do a light layer of some dark yellow, more green, and a bit of Venetian red, because I want the sun to be hitting that valley we have between the mountains. And then again I take my dark yellow and greens for that coast, well it's more like a shore, yeah, for that river shore we have going on. I cover that entirely with earthy green and I outline the bottom with some dark blue, which is going to be the shadow casted on the lake. It's going to make sense once I activate it, I promise. And again, I go over the blue with some orange. I take my brush and I blend light to dark, so from the yellow patch I did first, downwards towards the green and then the blue. I clean my brush every time I move from a dark area to brighter one, so when I go from the dark blue to a new green area. And I leave that to dry and I proceed on the left side of the painting with the left shore. I do a base layer of my earthy green. I'm just mimicking the same exact steps I did on the right side. I take a bit of yellow and then some blue and orange for the bombs. If drawing is not your thing, there is a traceable available to this and many other paintings over at my Patreon page, Sunshine Arts, and by checking that out, you help support me and the channel, plus we do full-time tutorials, and you get exclusive digital downloads of my paintings to use as screensavers, wallpapers, or print them out and use them as posters or cards or whatever you want. Like always, the supplies and the reference picture will be linked down below in the description box as well. I activate that the left shore, again light to dark, and while it dries I take some phthalo blue, which is the first blue I used for the sky, and I do some patches on top of the lake with it. I go left to right and I move upwards, and that is where the blue is going to be. Then here comes the tricky part. For the shadows I use orange, so beneath all of the shores I do a nice big patch of orange. And this is just to help me indicate where the shadows are going to be, because if I were to do the shadows first with the dark blue, I'd have a bit of a hard time distinguishing it from the phthalo blue. So once I have everything laid out in orange, then I go on top of it with the dark blue. I hope that makes sense. It's just a little trick I use as not to confuse myself, which is apparently a problem for me. But anywho, I take my ultramarine, which is the other blue I used for the sky, and I apply it here and there on the lake, and then I also take a very small amount of earthy green, which is the green I used throughout this whole painting. Then again with my watercolor brush with barely any water, this thing is like 8%, 85% dry. I go left to right on my lake as to activate it, and since it's pretty much dry, it skips some bits and leaves some of the white of the paper, which looks like sparkles or water reflections. Overall, I just really like the effect it gives when painting water. And when that dark blue and orange mix together, you can see it makes sort of a brown, which looks like the bottom of the shores. You know how they're like earth and clay and whatnot. And that's it for the lake. So while it dries, I take my dark blue again and I draw out some tiny details on the mountains with it. I just make some lines to mimic the slopes. If you hear any weird sounds, that is my cat that just wants to cuddle with my phone as I'm recording this. Sorry for that. But I just keep adding some straight vertical lines on top of the mountains to make them a bit more rocky and a bit more detailed. I add some more shadows on the shores. Every time there is like a piece that is going into the lake, I outline that with my helium blue reddish. I do so by just drawing some very easy horizontal lines and going parallel, like layer into layer whenever there's a tiny piece of land. I basically sandwich them in between some blue and it just looks pretty. I don't really have a plan for this, I just do whatever looks pretty to me. I add some more hints of Venetian red, of earthy green, and then I do a very light layer of my dark blue on top of my left mountain just to darken that up a bit because it was looking a bit too bright to me. Lastly, I take some black and I'm going to draw out some stones, some rocks that are peeking through the lake. So I just make like semicircles and do a straight line under them. Or you can just do dots or whatever. You can make them as big or as small as you want. I'm going to add several here to make it look more like a mountain lake. And this won't be one of my paintings if I don't add some silly little trees in the background. So I do a couple of dots with my earthy green. I do some straight lines beneath them for tree trunks with black, outline the bottom with dark blue, and outline the top with orange, and you have tiny trees. Don't forget to add the shadow beneath them, which is just another straight line. And on the right side, I'm going to add some fence, so I take walnut brown and I draw some vertical lines, which are going to be pieces of wood that make up the fence. They're bigger towards the edge of the painting, and they get tinier and tinier as we go up towards the mountains. And they also get closer to each other because perspective. Then I just do some finishing touches, and I slowly peel off the tape in the opposite direction to avoid ripping my paper. I like to give a very special thank you to my Patreon supporters for the month of May, and thank you all for watching. If you found any value in this video, please let me know by liking, commenting, and subscribing to my channel. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. We will see each other in the next video. Bye bye!